Hello students, let's start our class. Today we are going to revise our lesson from history. The name of the lesson is the French Revolution. The French Revolution was a watershed event in modern European history that began in 1789 and ended in the late 1790s with the ascent of Napoleon Bonaparte. During these periods, French citizens raised and redesigned their country's political landscape, uprooting centuries-old institutions such as absolute monarchy and a feudal system. The upheaval was caused by widespread discontent with the French monarchy and the poor economic policies of King Louis XVI, who met his death by guillotine, as did his wife Marie Antoinette. Although it failed to achieve all of its goals and at times degenerated into a chaotic bloodbath, the French Revolution played a critical role in shaping modern nation by showing the world the power inherent in the will of the people. Dear students, now we are going to discuss regarding the political, economic and social cause of the French Revolution. The political discontent of France was one of the causes of the revolution. In the 17th and 18th centuries, France was ruled by an absolute government. The king had all political powers. Anyone who criticized the government could be arrested and put in prison without trial. Louis XVI was king at the time of the French Revolution. He was more interested in hunting than governing France. He and his Austrian queen, Marie Antoinette, lived an extravagant life at the Palace of Versailles. They did not really care about the state of their country. The excerpt from the cases mentioned in document 3 shows that the votes in the assembly were not taken by head. The people of the Third Estate felt a sense of betrayal when the king supported the block voting over the head voting. The first two estates worked together to outvote the large Third Estate to keep them from becoming a threat to the power. Lord Acton, an Englishman, stated that the monarchy being overthrown was not the spark of the revolution. He recognized the American independence as the spark of the French Revolution. The French government was inefficient, unjust and corrupt. There was numerous government departments, different laws in different parts of the country and officials. Many people began to live at the way France was governed. The people couldn't do anything to bring about a change. The French Parliament was called the Estates General. It had not met since 1614 and could not without the consent of the king. It basically had no power. Economic cause. Economic problems created by the French king also contributed to the revolution. During the 18th century, the French government spent more money than it collected in taxes. By 1788, the country was bankrupt. Arthur Young, an Englishman, an observer who traveled to France from 1787 to 1789, angrily describes the living conditions of the peasants in his book, Travels in France. The amount of tax each person must pay is unfair. Landholders found in the nobility were not taxed much. The landholders found in the commoners were taxed heavily. There was lack of bread. The price of bread was a lot higher than one's ability to pay, which caused great misery for the people of France. Most of the money was spent on wars. France had been at war for nearly 50 years out of the previous 100 years. France supported the Americans in the American War of Independence. After that, France was in financial ruins. A large sum of money was also spent on palaces, entertainment, and gifts by the kings of France. The government spent a lot of money, which put forth high taxes. The tax system was unjust. The nobles and the clergy hardly paid any tax. The church owned 1/10 of the land in France and did not pay any taxes. The peasants were the victims of the heavy taxation. Louis XVI tried to reform the taxation system, but the nobility and the clergy refused to accept the new reforms. Therefore, the king was unable to make any financial reforms. Social cause. Social problems were a major factors that brought about the French Revolution. In the 18th century, France was a feudal country with class divisions. People were divided into 3 estates. The first estate consists of clergy. The second consists of nobility, and the third included the city workers, peasants, middle class, laborers, etc. The state which one belonged to decided one's power and rights. This shows the social class distinctions. The first estate was made up of 1% of the people and owned 10% of the land in France. The second estate consists of 2% of the people and owned 35% of the land. The third estate held 97% of the people who owned 55% of the land. The people to land proportion was unjust looking at the amount of people in each estate. The third estate held very little land compared to amount of the people it had. It was overcrowded. The first and the second estate were the privileged classes. The clergy and the nobility were exempt from many taxes. They had to pay about 4/5 of their income on tax. They also needed to pay the land tax, also the taxes on property, roads, and salt. The third estate was the most discontent class. The bourgeoisie, that is the middle class, were well educated. They were strongly influenced by the ideas of Voltaire and Rousseau, who attacked the injustice of the time. Rousseau believed that people are basically good but become corrupted by society. In an ideal society, people would make the laws and would obey them willingly. Probably the most famous of the philosophers was Francois Marie Arnaud, who took the name of Voltaire. He used biting wit as a weapon to expose the abuses of his day. He targeted corrupt officials and ideal aristocrats with his pen. He batted inequality, injustice, and superstition. He detested the slave trade and deplored religious prejudice. They resented the privilege of the nobility and wanted a larger role in the state affairs. City workers were angry because their wages were not enough to buy goods when prices were going up rapidly. The peasants made up 80% of the population and had to pay heavy taxes. Although some authors may claim that the revolution was caused by the middle class, there are plenty of reasons for the peasants to have a major influence in it. The working classes were not able to read or write, but people placed in a dire situation can in fact become a power to control or start the revolution. France's peasants were subject to certain feudalities called banalities. This include the required use for payment of the lord's meal or grind grain and his oven to bake bread. The lord could also require a certain number of days each year of the peasants' labor. Peasants were targeted by society. The French peasant, as McAfee puts it, were victims of long-standing oppression. Dear students, let's recap the portion. The French Revolution was a watershed event in modern European history and began in 1789 and ended in the late 1790s with the ascent of Napoleon Bonaparte. There were many causes for the outbreak of the French Revolution. The political discontent of France was one of the causes of the revolution. The economic problem created by the French king also contributed to the revolutions. And social problems were a major factor that brought about the revolution. Thank you, students. Have a nice day.